Hello, and welcome to another episode of It's a History Podcast. I am your host, Madison, and this week we are going to be looking at the history of federal holidays. Over the course of today's episode, we will be looking to answer when did they start, and how is it decided that a holiday will be a federal holiday? Before we get into the holidays themselves, the federal holidays that we are talking about are only applicable to federal employees and the residents of Washington, D.C. It is not within the president's or Congress's power to declare a national holiday, as, quote, each state individually determines its legal holidays. So that means that days that we consider national holidays are days that the states have also decided to adapt as holidays. And it can also go the other way too. Sometimes the federal government adopts a day as a holiday after multiple states have already made the day a holiday. There are currently 12 permanent federal holidays, and they are New Year's Day, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Inauguration Day after a presidential election, President's Day, Memorial Day, Juneteenth, Independence Day, Labor Day, Indigenous Peoples Day, formerly known as Columbus Day, Veterans Day, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. The very first federal holidays were put in place in 1870 after Congress granted paid time off for New Year's Day, Independence Day, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. Prior to 1870, these 4 days, in addition to George Washington's birthday, were days that it was customary for offices, especially within Washington, D.C., to be closed for the day. It would be safe to assume that many federal workers would have already had these days off, but with Congress's 1870 decision, they would now be paid. But there was a catch. This paid time off was only available for the federal workers who were actually working in Washington, D.C. Out of all the federal workers in the year 1870, 5,300 worked within the city limits, but the other 50,600 worked elsewhere throughout the nation, which meant that the vast majority of federal workers were not a part of this initial paid time off. It wouldn't be until 1880, 10 years after the initial round of federal holidays being passed, that all federal workers, no matter where they lived in the U.S., would be paid for the days off. And the legislation was only brought up because of a grievance that had been filed by a group of non-D.C. based federal workers who had not been paid on New Year's Day, while the D.C. based federal workers had been paid for the day. President Rutherford B. Hayes signed the bill that would allow for these grievanced federal employees to receive this benefit pay, with the House committee stressing that, in their opinion, the other federal employees should be placed upon an equality in this regard, referring to the holiday payment. In 1885, Congress made it so that these federal holidays granted paid time off to all federal employees, not just federal employees located within the city limits of Washington, D.C. The legislation that was passed approved holiday pay to, quote, per diem employees of the government on duty at Washington or elsewhere in the United States. In the expanding list of federal holidays, George Washington's birthday was next to be added, which we commonly call President's Day, in 1880. Originally celebrated on February 22nd, Washington's birthday was celebrated on the 22nd of February annually up until 1968, when the Uniform Monday Holiday Act was enacted. The next day added was Decoration Day in 1888. What is Decoration Day, you might ask? Well, it's our modern-day Memorial Day. It is thought that this holiday was originally brought up due to the rather large number of federal employees who had fought in the Civil War. In particular, these Civil War veterans were members of the Grand Army of the Republic, which was an organization of Union Civil War veterans who, quote, desired to participate in Memorial Day ceremonies honoring those who died in the conflict. With so many federal employees being a part of the organization, they were already experiencing a sizable amount of the workforce being absent on these Memorial Days, and this sector of the workforce was doing so without pay. Ultimately, the creation of this federal holiday was due to a portion of Congress believing that federal employees should, quote, be allowed this day as a holiday with pay so that they might not suffer loss of wages by reason of joining and paying their respect to the memory of those who died in the service of their country. Next to be added to the list was Labor Day. In 1894, in contrast to the previous federal holidays that had been added to commemorate more traditional celebrations, Labor Day was created to honor the nation's labor. By the time Labor Day became a federal holiday, it was already recognized as a legal holiday in 23 states. The sentiment behind the holiday is summarized by this quote from the House committee. The intent of the holiday is to increase the feeling of common brotherhood among men in all crafts and callings, and at the same time kindle an honorable desire in each craft to surpass the rest. It wouldn't be until over 40 years later, in 1938, that the next federal holiday would be added. In 1938, Armistice Day, which we know as Veterans Day today, was added to the collection of federal holidays to be celebrated on November 11th. This date was chosen to commemorate those who fought in World War I, and this day in particular was chosen as it was the day that hostility had ended. Again, this was a day that was already celebrated within the states, with all 48 states already celebrating the day. While Congress did recognize that they could not actually set any national holidays, they wanted to bring the federal government in line with something that the country was already celebrating. In 1954, the holiday name was officially changed from Armistice Day to Veterans Day, to broaden the day to not just being a commemorative day for World War I, but rather a day to celebrate all veterans no matter what conflict they had been involved in. When it comes to Thanksgiving, the day itself had been a federal holiday ever since the first round of federal holidays. But in 1941, Congress made the decision to specifically designate the fourth Thursday in every November as Thanksgiving Day. Thanksgiving is different from holidays like Christmas or New Year's, as there is no specific date that is associated with the day. The first Thanksgiving was on November 26, 1789, after George Washington issued a proclamation calling for a, quote, a day of public thanksgiving and prayer. The next Thanksgiving would not be until 6 years later, when Washington again called for a national day of Thanksgiving on Thursday, February 19, 1795. It wouldn't be until 1863 that celebrating Thanksgiving was something that the nation as a whole observed annually. President Lincoln had stated that Thanksgiving would be celebrated on the fourth Thursday of November, and for the next 75 years, the day that Thanksgiving was celebrated on would be dependent on who was president at the time, and would rotate between the fourth Thursday in November and the first Thursday in December. Briefly, while FDR was president, in an effort to jumpstart the economy, he declared that Thanksgiving would be on the third Thursday of November in an effort to lengthen the Christmas shopping season. This was met with backlash and only happened for 2 years in 1939 and 1940. In 1941, FDR signed a joint resolution that would make Thanksgiving permanently celebrated on the fourth Thursday of every November. The next holiday added to the roster was Inauguration Day. In 1957, President Eisenhower established Inauguration Day as a federal holiday. Because Washington, D.C. is technically not a part of Virginia, it allowed the residents of Washington, D.C. to celebrate the day. Following Inauguration Day, Columbus Day was the next holiday added to the list. As a part of the Uniform Monday Act, which I speak about later, the holiday was added to commemorate Columbus's voyage to the New World. In recent years, we have transitioned from celebrating Columbus Day to instead celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day on the second Monday of October. In 2024, President Biden officially declared October 14th as Indigenous Peoples Day. Instead of celebrating Columbus Day, the day is now to celebrate the vast contributions of Indigenous communities to the world and acknowledge all that the Indigenous people in North America have had to face in the aftermath of the introduction of Europeans to North America. In 1983, Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday was added by President Reagan. The creation of a federal holiday ended 15 years of ongoing debate over a holiday to celebrate MLK. Discussions of creating a holiday to celebrate MLK's life started right after his assassination in 1968. Nearly missing the required amount of votes to become a holiday in 1979, missing just 4 votes to make the day a holiday. In 1983, the House revisited the topic to make MLK Day a holiday on the third Monday in January, and by October, the agreement was ready to be signed by Reagan. The most recent holiday added to the list was Juneteenth. Signed into legislation by President Biden, the holiday marks the June 19th announcement to the people of Texas that the Emancipation Proclamation freeing enslaved people in the Confederacy was in effect. I have spoken about the Uniform Monday Holiday Act a couple of times in this episode, so let's get into what that is. In June of 1968, Congress approved the Uniform Monday Holidays Act, which made Washington's birthday, Memorial Day, and Veterans Day all celebrated on specific Mondays. Washington's birthday was to be celebrated on the third Monday in February, Memorial Day on the last Monday in May, and Veterans Day on the fourth Monday in October. This act, which also brought Christopher Columbus Day in to be celebrated on the second Monday of October, made it so these holidays would not be celebrated on random weekdays that align with their original holiday date, but make the celebration something that would align more with the current typical work schedule and commercial landscape of the U.S. This also made it so the day off would correlate with a weekend and allow families to spend more time together and avoid excessive absenteeism on the days in between the holiday and the weekend. Veterans Day was originally a part of this Monday Act, but in 1975, But in 1975, after opposition from veterans organizations who were not happy with the change and coming to terms that 46 states had not changed the day they celebrated Veterans Day to align with the Monday Act, they changed the holiday back to its original November 11th date. If November 11th happens to fall on a Saturday, the holiday is celebrated the Friday before, and if it falls on a Sunday, the day is celebrated on the Monday after. And that is where I'm going to end today's episode. Thank you for listening to today's episode, and I hope you learned something new about our nation's federal holidays. Sources for today's episode include an article from congress.gov titled Federal Holidays, Evolution and Current Practices, the National Museum of the American Indian, and a proclamation on Indigenous Peoples Day 2024. If you liked what you heard, please head over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and leave a review. If you have questions, comments, or topic ideas, you can email me at itshistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can also find me on Threads and Instagram at It's a History Podcast. Thank you again for listening to today's episode, and I hope to have you in the next one.